Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the History Cloak channel. I'm Mr. McGee. We have finally made it to the last episode of our Russia series. Now, I'm sorry for the long delay, but sometimes it just can't be helped, especially at the beginning of the school year. But I'm back, and we are taking a look at Boris Yeltsin, the first democratically elected president of Russia. He's elected in 1991. So that kind of tells you how long Russia had been under communism. We are going to take a look at Yeltsin's life, how he got elected, and what he did while he's in office, and how his resignation sets up the current leader of Russia, Vladimir Putin. So ladies and gentlemen, let's begin. Boris Yeltsin was born on February 1st, 1931. And like pretty much everybody else that we've seen who's been the leader of Russia, he becomes a member of the Communist Party as an adult, and he kind of works his way up through the system, eventually becoming a provincial leader from 1976 to 1985. Now, as provincial leader, he catches the eye of a guy named Mikhail Gorbachev. And Mikhail Gorbachev brings Yeltsin into his inner circle. In other words, Yeltsin becomes a non-voting member of the Politburo. Now, if you remember, the Politburo is the group in Moscow that pretty much runs all the different sections of the government and all the different parts of the Soviet Union. So if you're in the Politburo, you have a lot of power. Yeltsin is on the non-voting side, but he's in the Politburo. So for him, that is a fantastic thing. Now, if you remember from the last episode, Gorbachev comes into a sinking Soviet Union. And we talked in the last episode about glasnost, and we talked about perestroika, Gorbachev's attempt to try to kind of stabilize a sinking ship. Well, that openness allowed Yeltsin to start firing hundreds of corrupt bureaucrats, basically trying to make the slow, sagging, inefficient bureaucracy of the Soviet Union more efficient. Also, that openness allowed Yeltsin to criticize government officials for their behavior or for their actions within the Soviet Union. Now, the problem for Yeltsin is when he starts criticizing Gorbachev, saying that the pace of Gorbachev's reforms is too slow, and he starts openly criticizing him in Politburo meetings. Well, that doesn't go too well. And so our friend Boris Yeltsin gets fired. He gets demoted to some section of the Soviet government that deals with construction. Basically, this is the bureaucratic equivalent of an execution. He's not being killed, I don't mean that. What I mean is, he is being sent to a place from which he can never rise to power. He is going to be there the rest of his life as some low-level construction bureaucrat that nobody will ever see again. And you would think, hey, wait a second. I thought this episode was on Yeltsin. How on earth is he going to rise in the Soviet Union from his demotion to construction bureaucrat? How's that going to happen? Well, ladies and gentlemen, if you were paying attention in the last episode, you remember that part of glasnost also meant elections. Elections for the first time in Soviet history. Now, not elections for president of Russia, but elections to the legislature of Russia to represent different parts of the Soviet Union. So the people in Moscow remember this guy named Boris Yeltsin who was fighting against corruption and fired hundreds of bureaucrats to try to make things more efficient and spoke out against corruption. Well, now that they can vote, guess what? Yeltsin runs for office. In other words, he runs for a seat in the legislature. And the people in Moscow who are voting for him, they vote for him by over 90% because they remember the kind of guy that he was while he was in the Politburo. And all of a sudden, Yeltsin goes from career execution to, now that the people can vote, they elect him to the legislature. So Yeltsin wins election in 1989 to the legislature in Russia. He then, the next year, is voted to become the head of the legislature. So this guy has gone from career over, game over, to all of a sudden I'm back, and not only am I back, I am now the chairman by 1990 of the Russian legislature, which means that now he is in a position to not only deal with corruption, but also to be able to challenge the leadership in the Politburo. The following year, Yeltsin is elected president of Russia. This is in 1991. Now, this is the first time that Russia has ever held democratic elections for the head of Russia in the entire history of Russia, not just the entire history of the Soviet Union, but the entire history of Russia from the time it was ruled by monarchs, which obviously are not elected, through communism, through now. So 1991 is the very first time you have a democratically elected leader of the country of Russia. Yeltsin is going to win this election with around 59% of the vote. His next closest opponent has around 18% of the vote. So Yeltsin is popular, the people trust him, and they want him as their leader going into this new future. Now, if you're thinking, wow, that was easy. He just got elected. Everyone in the Politburo just said, oh, cool, awesome, we're okay with it. Well, no. So even though he's elected in June of 1991, the hardline communists, I say hardline just means these are the guys who want to hold on to the old system. These guys are not interested in change. They hated glasnost, they hated perestroika, they hate everything that's involved with that. Those men try a coup attempt where they hold Gorbachev hostage and they try to get all powers signed over to them as communists so that they can basically continue the old Soviet system. Well, guess what? When you open the door of freedom and people get to experience freedom, like electing their leaders, they don't want to go back. And so the people revolt. Yeltsin leads that revolt against the coup. The coup does not last long at all. The coup only lasted 2 days before it crumbled. But Yeltsin is elevated to even more popularity because even as the president-elect, he stands on an army tank in Moscow and rallies the people, basically saying that we're not going to stand for this coup attempt. Now, as I said before, the coup attempt collapsed after a couple days. Those people, most of them were either executed or they committed suicide and gone, never to be seen from again. So Yeltsin's heroic moment of standing on the tank happens in August 1991. Now, if you remember from last episode, Gorbachev is going to resign on December 25th, 1991, and Yeltsin will become the president of Russia. Now that Yeltsin is the president of Russia, the hard part is governing. You see, when you take a look at the history of any country, there's a lot of rocky moments, especially at the beginning. I mean, there are rocky moments in some countries 500, 1,000 years after they've been founded. But when you're starting a country for the first time, especially when you are dealing with coming out of communism, there's a lot of hard times ahead. As president of Russia, Yeltsin's going to come into power and immediately privatize property, privatize government assets, build a stock exchange, and pretty much allow free market capitalism. Having done all these things, the economic results were negative. Massive inflation hit the currency, as well as soaring property prices, as well as basically a recession of sorts. Now you may be asking yourself, hey, wait a second, Mr. McGee, isn't capitalism the thing that we want the Soviet Union to do, or we should say Russia now? And the answer is yes. The problem wasn't the plan. The problem was, if you've been in prison for 70 plus years, like the people of the Soviet Union, you can't overnight just switch to capitalism. Now, I can say this because I'm looking back at history, and it's easy because hindsight is 20/20. It's easy to look back and go, oh, Yeltsin should have done this. So I'm not saying that Yeltsin was stupid, because if I were in his position, would I have done any better? Probably not. But what I'm saying is, hindsight being 20/20, we can look and go, oh, you know what Yeltsin should have done? He should have implemented capitalism slowly over a period of time. So maybe the first year, privatize all business, and then slowly, incrementally go to private property. And then from there, start implementing other facets of free market capitalism. So doing it all at once, unfortunately, that just caused inflation, caused a lot of unemployment, and property prices went through the roof. So that led to a huge recession in Russia, which, with a recession in Russia, that made members of the legislature mad at him, and so his first term was a series of debates and fights with the legislature. At one point, Yeltsin disbanded the legislature. In other words, he basically closed the legislature down, which he shouldn't have done, and he couldn't legally do. The legislature tried to impeach him at another point in his first term. Not only that, but the region of Russia called Chechnya rebelled against him and tried to break away. He had to send troops to Chechnya to fight the Chechen rebels, and 80,000 people, mostly Chechens, died, causing an international controversy because of the number of civilian deaths. All of that plagued his first term. So his first term was, shall we put it, eventful and controversial in a lot of aspects. Yeltsin also suffered through health problems during his first term. And by health problems, I mean 3 different heart attacks. A lot of it brought on through heavy drinking. Despite all these things happening, both to the economy and to Yeltsin personally, he, in a surprising victory, won his re-election in 1996, defeating his communist challenger. After that re-election, the first thing he had to go through was bypass surgery because of the heart problems that he was suffering through in his first term. He's going to sign a peace treaty with the Chechen rebels that's going to last from 1996 until 1999. Most of Yeltsin's second term is spent in trying to build up the Russian economy, trying to make it successful. He's going to have more battles in his second term with the Russian legislature. There are still a number of communists in the Russian legislature who do not like his reform policies, so he is butting heads with those guys. In August of 1998, the ruble is the Russian currency, it collapses, causing the economy to go down even further. And the Russian economy only begins to stabilize as oil prices go up and Russia becomes more of a player in the oil market. If you have not paid attention to the news recently, Russia has a lot of oil. As Yeltsin's term goes on, he fires a number of prime ministers. In Russia, the prime minister is basically the vice president. Think of it that way. Yeltsin fires one prime minister after the other as he feels that they are not doing what they need to do to help the Russian economy to get better. And so he keeps on firing them. Now, why is this important to know that he's firing prime ministers? Because his final prime minister is a man named Vladimir Putin. And when I say final prime minister, I mean Yeltsin is going to resign on December 31st, 1999. In exchange, Vladimir Putin grants Yeltsin immunity from any further prosecutions from the Russian legislature. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how Vladimir Putin comes to power. So, think about it this way. Vladimir Putin, he is a former KGB officer during the Soviet Union days. He has seen Russia's transition to a republic, the collapse of the Soviet Union, and he has seen Russia lose a lot of power on the world stage. And for a Vladimir Putin who has been in power in the Soviet Union, he wants that power back. Thus ends the presidency of the first president of Russia, Boris Yeltsin. He's going to go into quiet retirement. He will die August 31st, 2007. For Vladimir Putin's part, once he becomes president in 1999, he will remain in power through various re-elections and other means, all of which are quite suspect. I'll leave a link in the description box below of a video that I made about 3 years ago detailing how his re-elections / being in power worked. Now that we're at the end of the Russia series, we can see all the things that have led up to the way Russia is today and how Vladimir Putin came to power. History is important because if you don't understand the context of events, it makes it very hard to be able to analyze it correctly and make the right decisions. So, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I apologize that it took so long to get this episode out. As I said before, there are some things in life that just can't be helped in terms of getting schedules and stuff together, especially when the school year starts. But again, I know I say this, but I will try to get videos out a lot more quickly. But I hope you have enjoyed the Russia series. Leave your comments respectfully and politely in the description box below. Let me know what you liked about this series. Let me know about anything you think I could have done differently to make this series better. Even though it's the end of the series, it is not the end of this channel. There will be a new series coming up, and I will let you know about that in the future. And by the future, hopefully a week from now. Take care.